file on the incident at Kholat Syakhl begins not with the discovery of the tent, but with a route plan approved by the Route Commission of Sverdlovsk. According to records dated January 1959, a group of 10 hikers applied for permission to conduct a Grade 3 ski expedition across the northern Ural Mountains. At the time, Grade 3 was the highest difficulty classification available in the Soviet Union. To achieve this certification, the group was required to traverse over 300 kilometers and ascend 2 specific peaks, Atorten and Kholat. The documentation indicates that the expedition was led by Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old radio engineering student at the Ural Polytechnic Institute. His file describes him as a highly experienced outdoorsman, respected for his technical knowledge and rigid adherence to planning. The team consisted primarily of students and graduates from the same institute. Alongside Dyatlov, the roster included Zinaida Kolmogorova, Yuri Dorshenko, Lyudmila Dubinina, Alexander Kolvatov, Rustam Slobodin, Georgy Krivonishenko, and Nikolai Thiboks-Brignoles. A late addition to the group was Semyon Zolotaryov, a 37-year-old sports instructor who, unlike the others, was a veteran of the Great Patriotic War. Investigators later noted that Zolotaryov was significantly older than the other members and had not trained with Dyatlov previously, a factor that would become a point of scrutiny during the review of group dynamics. The 10th member listed on the initial departure manifest was Yuri Yudin. Preparation for the trek involved significant logistical coordination. Receipts and inventory lists recovered from the Institute show that the group was equipped with typical gear for the era. Though by modern standards, the equipment was primitive and heavy. They carried wooden skis, bamboo ski poles, and large canvas backpacks. The group did not utilize individual shelters. Instead, they carried a single, large canvas tent composed of 2 4-person sections stitched together. A design Dyatlov had modified himself. To combat the sub-zero temperatures, they transported a collapsible stove, which required manual assembly and venting through the tent roof. Food inventories listed oats, canned meats, crackers, sugar, and cocoa. The total weight per person was calculated to be nearly 30 kilograms at the start of the trek. The timeline of the operation officially began on January 23rd, 1959. Records from the Sverdlovsk railway station confirm that the group boarded a train bound for Serov. Photographs taken during this leg of the journey show the group in high spirits, documenting their interactions with local passengers and their transit through the industrial landscape of the Urals. Upon arrival in Serov the following day, police logs indicate a minor incident where the group was briefly detained due to a misunderstanding regarding their documentation, though they were released without charge. They continued by train to Ivdel, arriving late on the night of January 24th. From Ivdel, the logistical challenge shifted to reaching the trailhead. The group boarded a bus to Vizhai, the last inhabited settlement of significance in the region. Vizhai served as a hub for timber operations and a penal colony administration center. Communications recorded in the group's diaries describe the settlement as remote and rugged. It was here, on January 25th, that the group spent their final night in civilization. They purchased loaves of bread and engaged with local residents to gather intelligence on the snow conditions in the mountains. On January 26th, the group secured transport on a flatbed truck bound for a logging settlement known as Sector 41. Photographs recovered later depict the group huddled together on the open bed of the truck, wrapped in heavy coats to shield themselves from the wind. Upon reaching Sector 41, they were hosted by the loggers. Diary entries from this date reflect a positive interaction with the workers, who shared stories about the local Mansi population and the terrain ahead. The group slept in the workers' dormitory, a detail confirmed by witness statements collected weeks later during the official inquiry. The following day, January 27th, the group began the first leg of the ski march. Their destination was an abandoned geological site referred to as North Second. They hired a horse-drawn sleigh to transport their heavy packs for this initial stretch, allowing them to ski unencumbered. They arrived at the abandoned settlement late in the day. It was at this location that the first significant deviation from the roster occurred. Yuri Yudin, who had been complaining of back and leg pain, determined that he could not continue. Medical records suggest he was suffering from an inflammation of the sciatic nerve. On the morning of January 28th, the group reorganized. Yudin prepared to return to Vizhai, taking with him geological samples found by the group and several letters to be mailed upon his return. Procedural reconstruction of this event relies heavily on photographs showing Yudin hugging his companions. He distributed his share of the communal gear and notably handed over his warm woolen vest to Kolmogorova. As Yudin skied back towards civilization, the remaining 9 individuals turned toward the untamed wilderness. This marked the point where external witness testimony ceased. From January 28th onward, the timeline is constructed solely from the group's recovered diaries. The roll of film developed by investigators, and the route map marked by Dyatlov. The group progressed along the Lasva River. The terrain was difficult. The river ice was covered in deep snow, and in places, the water had not fully frozen, requiring them to navigate along the banks. Diary entries indicate that the pace was slow. They covered roughly 15 kilometers per day. The weather was recorded as stable, with temperatures hovering around -8 to -12 degrees Celsius. They established a routine: wake at 6 in the morning, breakfast, break camp, ski until dusk, set up the large tent, assemble the stove, and sleep. On January 31st, the group reached the edge of the highland area. They were now at the upper reaches of the Ospia River. Here, the geography shifted from dense forest to open, windswept slopes. Photographs from this day show the group struggling against deeper snow and increasing wind. The trees became sparser, offering less protection from the elements. Dyatlov's log noted that the wind was western, warm, and penetrating, with speed picking up significantly near the timberline. According to the plan, the group intended to cross the pass and reach the foothills of Otthorten. However, the conditions on the afternoon of January 31st forced a tactical reassessment. The wind on the exposed ridge was too severe to cross immediately. They descended back into the valley of the Ospia to camp for the night. This location would become a critical reference point for investigators. It was here that they prepared a cache. To lighten their load for the ascent of Otthorten, the group constructed a supply depot. They built a raised platform in the snow and left behind extra food, including mandolins, sugar, and tinned beef, as well as a pair of spare skis. This cache was intended to be retrieved on their return journey. The existence of this cache, discovered weeks later, confirmed that the group fully intended to return this way, and that their logistical planning was intact up to this moment. On the morning of February 1st, the group broke camp late. Diary fragments suggest they did not depart until nearly noon. They began their ascent toward the pass that lay between the heights labeled on their maps as Height 1079 and Height 880. The indigenous Mansi name for Height 1079 is Kholat Syakhl. The weather logs from regional meteorological stations for February 1st indicate a sharp drop in temperature and an increase in wind speed, with gusts capable of creating whiteout conditions. Analysis of the tracks later found in the snow suggests that the group inadvertently deviated from the pass. Due to low visibility, they climbed higher onto the slope of Kholat Syakhl than intended. Realizing their error, they faced a decision: descend back into the forested valley to find shelter from the wind, or make camp on the exposed slope to avoid losing the altitude they had gained. Evidence at the location indicates they chose the latter. Around 5 in the afternoon on February 1st, the group began to excavate a platform in the snow on the eastern slope of the mountain. They used their skis to dig into the snowpack, creating a flat surface. On this surface, they pitched the large canvas tent. The slope angle was approximately 30 degrees. The tent was oriented with its entrance facing south. This decision to camp on the open slope has been the subject of extensive procedural analysis. It was a high-risk maneuver. The location offered no natural windbreaks. The temperature was dropping rapidly, estimated by later analysis to be between -25 and -30 degrees Celsius that night. Once the tent was pitched, the group arranged their sleeping area. They laid out their backpacks on the floor of the tent to provide insulation from the snow. On top of the packs, they spread 2 blankets, then their quilted jackets. The investigation noted that the stove was not assembled. It was found packed in its case. This suggests the group intended to sleep without a heat source, likely to conserve fuel, or because the conditions made assembling the pipe difficult in the high wind. The final tangible records of the group come from this evening. They ate a cold meal. Autopsies would later confirm the presence of ham and crackers in their systems, consumed approximately 6 to 8 hours prior to the cessation of vital functions. They produced a humorous mock newspaper titled The Evening Autorn, written on a sheet of notebook paper. The tone of the writing was lighthearted, joking about local folklore and the scientific prowess of the group members. As night fell on February 1st, the 9 members of the Dyatlov group settled into the tent. They removed their boots and wet outer clothing, a standard procedure to allow gear to dry and to maintain circulation. Photographs taken inside the tent show a chaotic but organized space, with members huddled together for warmth. At this point in the timeline, the documented evidence ends. The diaries stop. The camera shutters were not triggered again. The procedural failure in the timeline begins on February 12th. This was the date the group was scheduled to send a telegram to the sports club in Sverdlovsk to confirm their safe return to the village of Vizhai. No message arrived. Initially, this did not trigger an emergency response. Delays in such expeditions were considered routine. It was not until February 16th that families of the group members approached the administrators of the Ural Polytechnic Institute, demanding action. The first official search groups were not organized until February 20th, 8 days after the scheduled contact. This delay meant that by the time investigators reached the area of interest, weather had significantly altered the site. The search operation involved both civilian volunteers from the Institute and military personnel. Aircraft were deployed to survey the route. On February 22nd, investigation logs note that prison guards from the Ivdalag camp were interviewed to determine if any escapes had occurred in the region, a standard procedural step to rule out external human threats. The prison administration confirmed no escapes had been recorded. On February 26th, the investigation made its first significant breakthrough. A search group led by student volunteer Boris Slapsov identified a small, dark shape against the white snow of Kholat Syakhl. This was the tent. The condition of the tent upon discovery is the primary piece of physical evidence regarding the initial moments of the incident. The official search protocol recorded the tent as being partially collapsed and covered in snow. Crucially, the inspection revealed that the entrance of the tent was facing south and was properly laced shut. The fasteners were intact. This observation led investigators to examine the sides of the canvas. Forensic analysis conducted at the criminalistics laboratory later determined that the fabric had been severed from the inside. Several long incisions were documented, suggesting a frantic attempt to exit the shelter instantly, bypassing the laced entrance. The inventory of the tent was catalogued methodically. Investigators found warm clothing, blankets, cameras, and notably, the group's boots lined up against the side of the tent. This indicated that at the moment of the disturbance, the individuals were likely in a state of undress, without footwear. Food was found sliced and laid out, suggesting the group was preparing a meal when the incident occurred. A flask of alcohol was found unopened. There was no evidence of a struggle inside the tent, nor were there signs of unauthorized entry by external parties. Following the line of the slope downwards from the tent, searchers found footprints. The prints were preserved on pillars of hardened snow, a phenomenon where the wind erodes the soft snow around the compressed footprint. Investigators counted 8 or 9 sets of tracks. The tracks indicated that the individuals were walking, not running, down the slope. Some prints showed bare feet, others showed socks, and one set showed a single felt boot. The tracks proceeded for approximately 500 meters before disappearing into the deep snow near the tree line. The absence of external tracks was a cornerstone of the investigation's analysis. Investigators emphasized that no footprints other than those of the 9 hikers were found on the mountain. On February 27th, the search team concentrated their efforts near a large cedar tree located 1.5 kilometers downslope from the tent. Here, the first 2 individuals were located, Yuri Krivonishenko and Yuri Dorshenko. They were found near the remains of a small fire. The procedural report notes that both individuals were stripped to their underwear. Their clothing appeared to have been cut or torn off. Branches on the cedar tree were broken up to a height of 5 meters, suggesting one of the individuals had climbed the tree, possibly to gain a vantage point to look back toward the tent or to secure dry wood. The forensic assessment of the fire remains indicated it was insufficient to provide sustainable warmth for an extended period. The location was exposed to the wind. The positioning of the individuals suggested they had been tending the fire until they succumbed to the elements. Between the cedar tree and the tent, searchers located 3 more individuals: Igor Dyatlov, Zinaida Kolmogorova, and Rustam Slobodin. Their positions were significant. They were found at intervals of 300, 480, and 630 meters from the cedar tree. Their orientation indicated they were attempting to return to the tent up the slope. Dyatlov was found lying on his back, one hand clutching a small birch branch. Kolmogorova was found further up the slope, her posture suggesting movement forward against the incline. Slobodin was found between them. The first phase of the medical examination was conducted in early March by the regional medical examiner, Dr. Boris Vozrozhdeny. The reports filed for these first 5 individuals were relatively consistent. The cause of the loss of life was determined to be hypothermia, while minor abrasions and soft tissue damage were noted on the faces and hands. These were consistent with exposure to the elements and the rough terrain. The autopsy report for Slobodin noted a fracture to the frontal bone of the skull, measuring 6 centimeters long and up to 1 centimeter wide. However, medical examiners stated this injury alone was likely not the cause of the loss of life, and concluded that the cold was the decisive factor. At this point in the investigation, the working theory leaned heavily toward a natural incident precipitated by weather conditions. However, the timeline of discovery stalled. 4 members of the group were still unaccounted for. The search continued through March and April, hampered by harsh weather. It was not until May 4th, after the snow began to melt, that the remaining 4 individuals were located. They were found in a ravine, approximately 75 meters further into the woods from the cedar tree. They were buried under 4 meters of snow. The condition of the individuals in the ravine presented a more complex forensic challenge. Unlike the first group, these individuals showed signs of significant physical trauma. The autopsy reports detailed extensive internal damage. One individual, Lyudmila Dubinina, sustained a major hemorrhage in the right atrium of the heart and 10 fractured ribs. Nikolai Thibox-Brignoles presented with a major skull fracture. Semyon Zolotaryov had 5 fractured ribs on the right side. The medical examiner compared the force required to cause such injuries to that of a car crash. Notably, there were no corresponding external soft tissue injuries that would typically accompany such fractures if they were caused by a direct blow from a weapon or a fall against a rock. The pressure had been applied with immense force, but without localized external trauma. The medical examiner concluded that the injuries were fatal and would have incapacitated the individuals almost immediately. The autopsy report for Dubinina also noted the absence of soft tissue in the oral cavity and the ocular region. A similar observation was made regarding Zolotaryov, while later analysis by independent experts suggested these absences could be attributed to natural decomposition processes in the running water of the ravine and scavenger activity. The initial report simply listed the missing tissue as a finding. The clothing analysis of the group in the ravine provided a timeline of survival. They were better dressed than the group at the cedar tree. Evidence suggested that after the first 2 individuals at the cedar ceased to function, the remaining members removed their clothes to wrap around themselves. Pieces of clothing belonging to the individuals found at the cedar were discovered on the individuals in the ravine. 1 foot was found wrapped in a torn piece of wool trousers. This redistribution of clothing implies a period of coherence and survival efforts following the initial retreat from the tent. Following the autopsies, a supplementary procedural step was taken that was not standard for hiking accidents. Portions of the clothing recovered from the ravine were sent for radiological testing. The chief radiologist of the city of Sverdlovsk conducted the analysis. The resulting document, entered into the case file, stated that beta radiation was detected on the sweaters and trousers of 2 individuals. The levels were described as exceeding the natural background radiation, while the contamination was localized and could have been washed away by the melting snow. The source of this radiation was never identified in the investigation records, and no further radiological surveys of the area were ordered. The investigation officially concluded in late May 1959. The lead investigator, Lev Ivanov, prepared the final case resolution. The document acknowledged the chaotic departure from the tent, the extreme weather conditions, and the severe injuries sustained by the group in the ravine. However, the report failed to synthesize these elements into a cohesive sequence of events. It did not explain what prompted the initial exit from the tent, nor did it account for the source of the force that caused the internal trauma. The final conclusion, as written in the files, attributed the fatalities to a compelling natural force that the hikers were unable to overcome. The language used was legally ambiguous, satisfying the requirement to close the file without identifying a specific perpetrator or precise sequence of events. Following this determination, the case was closed. The files were sent to a secret archive, and the area where the incident occurred was declared off-limits to skiers and hikers for 3 years. Administrative records show that the families of the individuals were informed of the results, but were not given access to the full autopsy reports or the investigation logs at the time. The abrupt cessation of the investigative process left numerous procedural questions unanswered. the mismatch between the hypothermia findings of the first group and the physical trauma of the second group created a disjointed medical narrative. Additionally, the files contain witness statements from another hiking group situated 50 kilometers south of the location. These witnesses reported seeing strange orange spheres in the sky on the night of the incident. While these reports were included in the raw data of the investigation, they were not factored into the final conclusion. Ultimately, the aftermath of the incident on the slope is defined by the disconnect between the tangible evidence and the official conclusion. The records show a team of investigators who diligently documented the chaotic scene. The scattered shoes, the broken branches, the frozen individuals. Yet the synthesis of this data into a coherent narrative was halted. The file was archived. The physical evidence was eventually destroyed or lost to time. And the specific sequence of events that night remains a reconstruction based on incomplete data points. The doctrine of evidence in this case leads to a dead end, where the specific cause of the trauma and the reason for the evacuation cannot be bridged by the surviving documents.